If you've watched any of my other videos pertaining to Megamind and the villain Titan in particular, and you can find links to them in the description in case you're curious, you'll know that I believe Hal Stewart wasn't meant to be a deconstruction of nerds. However, one thing I most definitely agree with about his character is that he's got entitlement issues and that Roxanne doesn't owe him anything just because he treats her decently. And today, I'd like to apply the lessons that can be learned about Hal's character to another movie I've seen, or more specifically, what people have said about the movie in question. Now that being said, I will try to keep the spoilers to a minimum in this video, but in case I, for whatever reason, bring up something you don't want to know anything about, you might just want to click off the video and come back later. This will be your one and only warning. And also, please forgive me if I get a little angry once or twice, because I'm going to be bringing up a topic or two that really frustrates me. And if you're uncomfortable with that, please feel free to skip over this video. Alright, so with all of that out of the way, let's get right into it. Okay, so a few months ago, I did a video entitled, Do Older Movies Not Get Due Respect? And you can find a link to that video in the description as well. And one thing I talk at length about is certain movie sites where people treat their opinions as the be-all to end-all, 100% absolute fact, and how that frankly drives me crazy. Now, sometimes they bring up good points, yes, and I'll get to one of those in a minute. But you wouldn't believe some of the absolute nonsense and holier than thou garbage I have read in reference to certain movies. But the movie that absolutely takes the cake for me is a much older movie, a 1940 fantasy epic called The Thief of Baghdad. Now, just for a brief overview for those of you who don't know, and I'm sure that's most of you, if you've seen Disney's Aladdin, you pretty much know everything you need to know for this video, as this was actually the main inspiration behind that one. And as I said, I'm going out of my way to avoid spoilers here. The only real differences relevant here are that the princess is of a different kingdom than of the royal advisor Jaffar, that Jaffar had been ruling his kingdom by proxy by manipulating and isolating the kingdom's prince and true ruler, and it's the prince and princess who fall in love, and that Jaffar is absolutely set on having her for himself. Again, there's obviously a lot more to it than that, but that's all you need to know in order to understand this video. Now, here's the thing. It's not the movie itself I have any issue with. I frankly think it's great, and I'm still convinced this movie was a huge inspiration for George Lucas when making Star Wars, and especially the prequel trilogy. Seriously, as I said in another video, I don't think I ever truly understood Anakin and Padme's romance, or at least what he was going for with it, until I saw this movie. But to get back on topic, the movie isn't the problem here. It's what people have said about it on some of these sites. But before I get into that, let me first bring up a quote from one of these sites about Megamind, a quote that I happen to completely agree with. Some people even say it's not Hal's fault because Roxanne broke his heart, but they forget that Roxanne has the right, as a human being, to say no to a man if she isn't attracted to him. And again, I believe this quote is right on the money. We even see a brilliant contrast between how Hal and Megamind take her rejection, and how Megamind, who's heartbroken but accepts her choice, is the one that's presented in the right, and as that quote demonstrates, did exactly what he should do. You'll even notice that part of the quote is specifically italicized. And no, that isn't something I did. I directly copy and pasted this quote in order to emphasize that as a human being, Roxanne is entitled to choose the man she wants for any reason. Now, let's contrast this with a couple of quotes from this exact same site on the Thief of Baghdad. And just for a little extra context first, a major plot point in the movie is that the prince, named Ahmed, and the princess fall in love, but that Jaffar wants her to love him instead, and spends most of the movie desperately trying to get her to do just that. Okay, so here are the quotes. Jaffar is an anti-villain, at least when it comes to his crush on the princess. He refuses to hypnotize her at first, constantly trembles when he's around her, and can't bring himself to touch her. His fingers hover just a few inches from her, and only his shadow can touch her. So basically, what this quote is saying is because this sorcerer doesn't initially try to brainwash the princess, and because he actually respects her personal space like any man should, this automatically makes him a good man. Now, one could argue that this is just somebody giving him credit where it's due, and that it's not like they're condoning any of his genuinely bad deeds. And that is fair enough. But with this next quote is where things start to get messed up. From a modern perspective, Jaffar's evilness is a source of some values dissonance. Jafar actually comes and asks for the princess's hand properly instead of just breaking into her garden, and even gives her a choice to command him. He repeatedly refuses to rape her even if he could. But he's presented as the weaker, unmanly guy because of this. He shows noble intentions towards her for the first half of the film and only turns murderous after he's gone nuts from her repeated rejections. Why she'd choose a bumbling pretty boy over a smart, sexy engineer and wizard, we will never know. Now, let me just start by saying this is one of the stupidest things I have ever read. But before I even get into that quote, let me just give you the last quote first. Movie magazines at the time reported on the unusual enthusiasm Jafar would inspire in female fans. He ended up receiving many letters from fangirls who said they would have definitely chosen Jafar over Ahmed. Right, because I'm sure anybody would choose a sweaty 47-year-old man who murders people for thinking over an attractive 20-something man who wants to rule his kingdom with compassion and have everybody in it live happy lives. Now listen, if you find this guy attractive, that's fine. And frankly, I really don't care. It's the characters I'm trying to demonstrate this point on, not the actors. And on that topic, let's go back over that second quote in particular and look at it piece by piece. Now that first sentence, about asking for her hand rather than breaking into her garden, needs more context. Because here's the thing. Jafar does go to the princess's father and ask for her hand, but at the same time, he also reveals that he has already seen the princess by gazing at her through a crystal ball. Now, by contrast, Ahmed does technically break into her garden, but it's only because he wants to see what she looks like, as no man is allowed to see her face, and makes his presence known to her almost immediately. So let me ask you this. Who's the one taking the more modern approach here? The man who asks the woman's father for her hand instead of the woman herself, essentially asking for her as payment in exchange for a toy, no less, and spied on her doing who knows what and in who knows what state of dress from afar, or the man who immediately reveals himself to her and makes his feelings known to her directly? Who's the one that's really considering her feelings and truly treating her like an equal in this situation? But the next part has to be the worst offender. You seriously want to give this guy a medal because he didn't rape her? Haven't men, both in fiction and real life, been sent to jail and scrutinized for doing much less, and rightfully so? And yet, they're congratulating this guy for doing what any man with any sense of right and wrong would do? I'm telling you, on any other page on this site, this would be called pure patting on the back for common decency, and considered nothing short of making toxic excuses for him. Excuses he doesn't deserve. And as far as that next sentence goes, that's an outright lie. He's never presented as weak or unmanly because he won't force himself on her. He's portrayed as somewhat pathetic in his pursuits, yes, but that's only because it's clear that he doesn't stand a chance with her, and not because of his direct actions or lack thereof regarding her. I mean, trying to defend him because he's not rough with her. And I suppose this is Ahmed dragging her by the hair, beating her with a club, and having his way with her? Honestly, you only need to see this movie to know that none of these arguments hold up to any scrutiny. And of course, there's the next sentence. So basically, you're saying that it's the princess's fault that Jaffar murdered her father, tried to kill her true love, and brainwashed her because she rejected him. Hello! As this very same site points out, as a human being, the princess has the right to say no to anybody she's not interested in. She owes Jafar nothing. It doesn't matter how noble he behaved towards her, especially because he should treat her like that regardless. Anything Jafar does in response to her rejection is all on him, just like how Titan's rampage is all on Hal after Roxanne rejects him. I mean, this quote is basically the equivalent of blaming Roxanne for everything Hal did because she repeatedly rejected him even though he was nice to her. But as that page rightfully pointed out, it's Roxanne's choice, and she doesn't owe Hal anything. And it should be no different as far as the princess is concerned. She has the right to choose who she wants, and if Jafar can't accept that, that's his problem, not hers. I mean, that sentence is nothing short of blaming the victim. Plain and simple. And then there's the final sentence. And let me just say, I know exactly why she chose Ahmed to Jafar. Because first of all, Ahmed is not a bumbling pretty boy. He's simply a sheltered prince who would rule his kingdom wisely, compassionately, and for his people if it weren't for Jafar. And his extremely compassionate nature is on full display from the moment she meets him. Now, Jafar may or may not be all of those things listed there, but he also has people murdered for thinking too much, runs his kingdom with an iron fist, is hated by the people because he drives them to poverty and famine without a second thought, makes it clear he despises his subjects, manipulates the man he should be taking care of, and tries to have him murdered repeatedly so he can rule the kingdom himself, and finally resorts to brainwashing a woman and murdering her own father when she makes it clear she's not interested in him. Now let me ask you this. Even without seeing the movie, is it any wonder to you why she chose who she did? Now, like I said before, I don't have any issues with the movie itself. It's squarely the morons who wrote those quotes that I have the problem with. Because I know darn well that if the exact same things were said in a movie about similar characters, that same site would be all over the movie and all of the problematic, unfortunate implications and all those other fancy words about the horrible message it's sending. And yet, in this case, they're allowed to write it themselves because somebody clearly found Jaffar attractive and is making excuses for him. And that's exactly what all those quotes are, excuses. Do you see what I'm saying about people trying to treat their opinions as fact and the hypocrisy that runs rampant on these kinds of sites? Because how can there be two pages on the exact same site where one gets everything dead right about a woman's right to choose who she loves and that the villain's subsequent rampage is all on him, while the other says everything is her fault because she rejected him and was an idiot for not falling in love with him? I'm telling you, these sites need a major overhauling, in my humble opinion. Because normally I probably wouldn't even bring up stuff like this. Because as I've said, at one point I was reading ridiculous nonsense on a daily basis. But I felt I just couldn't ignore what was said about this movie, especially when you compare it to what they themselves said about Titan. And if you ask me, those quotes, and specifically the second one, have so many issues with them, it's not even funny, and are ironically promoting the very problems they otherwise seem so determined to find and destroy in everything, even if it never existed in most of the movies they go after to begin with. Alright, I think I'm going to stop there. So now I want to hear what you think. Do you think those quotes I presented on the Thief of Baghdad are wrong and go completely against the quote pertaining to Roxanne? Or do you believe I'm just overreacting to the whole thing? Please let me know what you think in the comments. And once again, I'm sorry if I got a little mad or aggressive in some places, but if you couldn't tell, I just feel rather passionately about the implications this subject presents. But if you completely disagree with me on it, that's fine. I have no issues with you if you do. And finally, thank you all for watching. I really appreciate all of it, and I hope to see you all next time.